If everything goes to plan and there are no further delays, we can expect the release of Bannerlord's War Sales DLC within the next few weeks or possibly even days, accompanied by the 1.3 base game update many a player has been waiting for. In fact, the beta version of that major patch was released a few days ago, with players already testing it out. But the real question is in fact the one we're going to be tackling in this video. After almost 5 years since Bannerlord's early access release, is the update too little, too late? And what about the addition of the War Sales DLC possibly ignoring many of the base game's shortcomings? In this video I want to talk about the good and the bad, the praise and the critique, sharing both my opinion and observations, and in doing so I'm hoping to find some sort of middle ground on this topic, because I do believe the truth of the matter lies somewhere in the middle. Especially when we look at the two more extreme sides of the community that are facing each other head to head in the community threads and comments sections when it comes to the state of Bannerlord. On one side you have those steadfast supporting TaleWorlds and everything they deliver, and on the other, those being critical of the company and how they have handled the development of Mount and Blade to Bannerlord. Both sides, I'm sure you'll agree, coming at it from a form of passion and interest for their beloved franchise. So if you're up for this little yap session of mine and you want to share your opinion on this topic, please do so in the comment section down below. Perhaps you'll find yourself agreeing on some points that I bring up, or perhaps you'll heavily disagree. Either way, I welcome everyone their take on this, just keep it civil, alright? With that having said, let's dive into it and find out which way the wind will blow for TaleWorlds, shall we? Let me start by saying, especially when it comes to content creators, because we are the ones advertising games, but also players. There is this trap we all fall into so easily, which is constantly praising and supporting companies and developers for their work, and more specifically, talking only about the positive things here. Advertising or highlighting only those points whilst ignoring all the issues or aspects that can still use improvement and so on. This in particular when something new comes out and it belongs to one of your or our favorite developers or franchises. It only makes sense if you've invested so much time into it and you've come to love it, you're going to be passionate about it, right? I tend to find myself doing this from time to time as well. It is a learning curve. I guess what I want to say is that I think it is not helpful for the developers, nor is it interesting for the player base to only talk about the positives, as I sometimes see my fellow creators or peers do. Oftentimes downplaying, ignoring, or on occasion I've seen players going even as far as insulting others when critique is valid and issues are apparent. It does not help the developers grow and fix things, nor does it help the consumers, aka you guys, because you will have a product that has issues or will start to lose traction, or its company starts losing their connection with a part of its audience that feels underrepresented, misheard, or blatantly ignored. This goes for all forms of media, by the way. I think Disney is one of the biggest examples you can give in terms of the movie industry, taking into account the past 10 years when it comes to only listening to a particular part of their audience and ignoring or going as far as even targeting or insulting the other side in their very own products. Getting a little close to the politics side there, I do try to steer away from those in my videos, but you know, that too can be a factor. Not saying it's what happened or is happening to Bannerlord, by the way. Not at all. Developers can have multiple reasons for not listening to their target audience or part of their audience, and sometimes this can prove to be beneficial to the product, and other times not so much. It is just so easy, as someone who has invested a lot of time, money and passion into following a story or playing a particular franchise and so on, it is so easy to forget, ignore or downplay the things that are in fact obvious and apparent issues, to the point where you find yourself incapable of delivering any criticism at all, or you even start pushing back negatively on other people their criticism. On the other hand, the positives need to be and should be praised, of course, so you got to find that middle ground somewhere. On extreme occasions, you'll have a lot more positive things to say about something or a lot more negative things, depending on if the product release is really good and reaches the majority of its intended target audience or not. And it's mostly subjective, right? It differs from person to person, what you like, what you dislike, but there are things that I believe you can tackle without taking an obvious position, from a more objective point of view. I'm talking about things that actually happened, right? Not just opinions, but events that can, if you put them together, create a clear timeline and help us navigate a little bit through the mess of online vitriol and rumors. On that note, I think it is fair to say that for most of the people that are, in one way or the other, criticizing TaleWorlds in regards to Bannerlord, their journey began in 2020, when the game was released in early access. Yes, that soon. Now, I don't know about you guys, but personally I've never been much of a fan of the release a game in early access yet have the public pay full AAA price for it. Remember the good old days where you bought a game and you got a physical copy of it handed to you and you could install it on your computer or your laptop and it's there, it's yours, and more often than not it's complete, a finished product? You guys remember those days? Those were good days. But so yeah, Bannerlord was released on Steam in early access in March 2020. You will have players argue in support of TaleWorlds that the developers are not AAA developers and that there will always be a level of jank within the game that you can expect, whilst others argue that plenty of indie developers are able to make complete working games and so on. Anyways, I'm not going to go into that particular discussion. I just want to highlight that these conversations were happening as early as 2020 and 2021, when Bannerlord was still in early access, highlighting the issues this game and TaleWorlds already faced as early on as its initial release date. Naturally, there are the pros and cons of buying a game in early access. I'll start with the cons. You are essentially buying a game that is incomplete, with features missing, potential bugs, poorly optimized, and then there is the risk of possible abandonment of the game by its developers, leading to negative reception and losing the trust of the community because you were promised certain things and the developers choose not to deliver. We've seen this happen too many a times to count with various games and studios. There are even extreme cases where a game is officially released to the public with the developers having promised a stable working game and what more, and then you play it and it's an absolute mess. On the other side, you have the pros. You are able to play and experience the game while it's in the process of development, whereas otherwise you would have to wait for months if not years. This is exciting. You can actually help the developers by providing feedback and funding, and thus benefit from that in potential future updates. Bannerlord was no different. It had a rough release and early access period, which included performance problems, stuttering and crashes, AI troops that behaved badly, struggled during sieges, features that were clearly missing or unfinished, and so much more. I have uploaded my fair share of videos on this channel covering the early access with the opinion of fellow players as well, as I was leader of a clan, and thus I also got to observe the multiplayer side of the game. So yeah, for those interested in that, just go look up my early gameplay videos or the one podcast video that I did. In any case, early access. I see its pros, I've experienced its cons. I'm not a big fan of it, but I was happy to support the developers by paying that price, especially since I really enjoyed Mount & Blade Warband, and I was looking forward to the more in-depth gameplay that Bannerlord would offer to the campaign, as well as the mods that would eventually be made for this latest game in the franchise. So, 2020, that is when and where the problems started for Bannerlord. Its release in early access, which brought with it the obvious issues I've mentioned earlier on, and thus generated a lot of criticism from the player base. Couple that with the fact that there was a pandemic going on at the time, this naturally did not help the developers, having to work remotely and all of the trouble that came with COVID-19, reducing their productivity. The fact that there was a pandemic going on did mean, however, that a lot of players were at home because of lockdown measurements, and thus it was also an ideal time to release a game. Couple that with the fact that fans had been waiting for nearly a decade for Mount & Blade 2, large numbers of players bought, installed and played the early access. even with TaleWorlds warning players that they will encounter bugs, glitches, balance issues, and missing or incomplete features. So my honest opinion, not many players saw bad in this. Mount & Blade, Warband, and the DLCs were received really well, and players were dying to play this new addition to the franchise, so getting to play it earlier didn't bother most. Then again, you would have some players argue that the pandemic was used as an excuse for deeper internal issues that were going on within the studio at the time, resulting in and being the real reason for the game's slow progress, at least according to those players. I think it is safe to say that at the time, after it got released and in the days, weeks and months to follow, there was already a growing player frustration towards the developers of TaleWorlds and some sense of disappointment with the actual state of Bannerlord. You would encounter discussions on the TaleWorlds forums and other platforms, with people talking about the game and the developers, arguing that maybe they bit off more than they could chew, that they had so many cool ideas and features, but these came out as half-baked, broken, or not even present at all. In a lot of cases, players would refer back to Warband, the game released a decade prior to Bannerlord, but with features that Bannerlord did not even have. Feasts, books, poems, and so on. But TheFrenchMonk, I hear you say, obviously at its release you can expect missing features. Why are players complaining at it so soon? Well, to that I would answer, you'd expect certain features that were present in the earlier Mount & Blade games to still be in its sequel, right? But that was not the case. To many players, their disappointment. It became painfully obvious to the community, even in its early access state, that the game was severely lacking in content, even compared to native Warband, the game that released 10 years prior to Bannerlord. Then again, it did release in early access, so at the time a lot of people, and rightfully so, were defending the game and praising its successful launch and supporting the developers. I just want to add to this that we are 5 years on now. Those people were obviously not able to look into the future, but it needs to be mentioned that there's still important features missing or not yet fleshed out, with the developers clearly shifting priorities to other aspects of the game, which is of course their full right, yet in doing so it is my opinion that they are in fact ignoring part of their audience and are actually relying on modding projects to do the work for them. Because eventually, this also took its sweet time mind you, modding opportunities came and the community certainly made use of them, following the months after Bannerlord got released, showing off their creativity, oftentimes fixing the issues of the native game, but more impressively so, being able to make their own worlds and games within this game. Though it didn't take long before the modding community too became frustrated with TaleWorlds early on due to a lack of communication and modding support, with the occasional patch update either resetting or hindering their work. I've actually covered the open letter that was sent to the developers by the modding community on this channel. That was almost 4 years ago now. You had like more than a dozen projects being represented in this letter, sharing their concerns and frustration with Bannerlord's development, to which TaleWorlds responded with meetings talking about those issues, coming up with solutions and providing extensive documentation for the coders and so on. Looking only at the native game though, without the support of the modding community, I think, as Pixelated Apollo put it so well in his video talking about war sales, in which I believe he was quoting a comment he read somewhere on the state of Bannerlord.
It's wide as an ocean, but as deep as a puddle.
I believe this comment to be quite accurate when describing the native game without its modding support. There is so much potential. It is unbelievable how much potential there is. It's a goldmine of an IP that TaleWorlds is sitting on. It's one of the reasons why so many players are frustrated, I guess, with the way its development has been handled. I would like for you guys to comment your opinions down below on this. Let me know if you agree or disagree and why. Because I feel like, coming back to my early observations of the game's mechanics and features, the developers obviously had great ideas. It is very noticeable if you look closely at the game. But these ideas were not quite as fleshed out as a lot of players would have liked. Many, I assume, if you've made it this far in the video, would probably type or say out loud, "Diplomacy! An actual fleshed out diplomacy system." The early game is the most interesting part of the single player campaign, but when it comes to the middle and late game, this is where many would start to lose interest in their playthrough, as it gets stale, repetitive, boring. Now I personally think that it says a lot that years into the development of your game, you have modders who are able to not just create their own full-on conversion projects, transforming the world of Calradia in any world they'd like, Westeros, feudal Japan, medieval Europe, you name it, they create it, as well as changing its troops to soldiers of the Napoleonic Wars, clone troopers, and so on. You know what I'm getting at, right? It says a lot that these modders are also able to add that level of depth which native Bannerlord so lacks and desperately needs. And this in a shorter period of time. Going from more fleshed out diplomacy systems to new minigames and events that you can encounter on the map, to bringing back the features that were present in Warband, such as books to level up your character, aka more content. And it is kind of putting the developers of TaleWorlds to shame here. But, as I said, we also got to take a look at the positives of the whole ordeal. TaleWorlds is still actively working on Bannerlord, with patches, and now a new paid expansion is coming, accompanied by the biggest base game update yet, 1.3. I believe I'm right to say that it is the hope of many a player, and especially when the polished version is released of the base game update, that it will bring back some life into this game, with a wide range of improvements going from new features to more refined gameplay systems and technical upgrades. Looking at the summarization of the patch notes, it is clear the developers can listen to their community, but there are also some things being added to the game that raise a few eyebrows here and there. So I'll talk briefly about the main things that this update brings with it. I'm not going to cover it all, but yeah, there are a bunch of interesting features and fixes that I thoroughly think were much needed to the native game, to spice things up a bit. And then there are also some changes that were made which you can argue are also interesting, but not necessarily in the positive way. The main thing being the stealth mechanic. This mechanic was actually brought into this update from another scrapped DLC that TaleWorlds was working on, which would also cover its own storyline, as far as I'm aware. I personally think it is a fun addition to the game. It adds a bit more to the roleplay aspect of being this sneaky assassin, infiltrating bandit layers or settlements and their dungeons. It allows for more roguelike focused playthroughs, right? On the other hand, is it necessary to have this mechanic in the game, especially given that the developers could have first tackled the other, more requested features that the community was asking for, such as a more in-depth diplomacy system? And yes, not the one we got with this update. There are mods out there that approached the diplomacy system and integrated it into this game better than this update does, sadly. Also, you can argue that as the stealth system stems from a scrap DLC, reportedly, it's merely included in this update to add something extra to the feature list. It's also baffling that when entering bandit hideouts, you have to first sneak in, and only then can you assault the hideout with additional men, which forces the player to first sneak instead of just attacking the bandits from the get-go. I'll leave that up to you guys to discuss what you think of that and what you think of the stealth system. Do you think it's good? Or do you reckon it could have used a bit more development as it offers just a few options beyond basic movement and concealment? Next up on the list, the visuals. I really like what they did here, by the way. The game looks a lot better than before. It's awesome to see a greater range of these custom environments which are tailored to cover specific times of the day. In addition, they optimized performance and improved certain animations, and the UI got some attention as well. I love the new main menu scenes, they look absolutely epic. There are also new and more ambient sounds which really draw you into the game. I think the random events feature also adds that little bit of freshness to your playthrough when walking around on the campaign map. Certain events can take place and you will have to choose out of a list of options which can have positive or negative effects on your character and their personality, or your clan, as well as the environment. Say there's a village you're close by and something happens. Certain choices may have an effect on that settlement and its population or growth. You can gain skill from it, items, gold, and it can affect your personal traits. So I quite like that. But again, I'll add to it, 5 years since early access and 3 years since official release, and we got these cards randomly popping up on your screen, and you can click on an option and it will have an effect. I don't mean to be like overly critical here, but like there are also Bannerlord mods out there that have this feature or that tried implementing it into the game. Only these came out months, if not years ago, just pointing that out here. Next to that, the update brings a lot of fixes with it, which, I mean, I can only welcome. We like and welcome fixes, further improvements and additions to the game. Let that be known. These include new armor pieces, shields, a new bandit faction called Deserters, which roam around nearby villages and are made up of trained soldiers instead of bandits and looters. We got some audio improvements and bug fixes, AI movement improvements both on the campaign map and in the field. There are also now trade agreements between kingdoms, which will see an increase of caravans visiting the other kingdom, and so on. So I would highly recommend checking out the beta yourself if you can, so you can have a better view on the things that were introduced to the game, because there's a lot more on that list than what I've listed here. But so yeah, as I said and as I asked at the start of this video, is this 1.3 update worth it after all this time? And to add to that, is the War Sales DLC going to add that level of depth so many players crave, or to quote one of many comments that I've read regarding this topic, is it just going to be a nice addition that addresses none of the game's many shortcomings? With competitors such as Chronicles Medieval on the horizon, I think it is fair to say that the TaleWorlds developers are going to have to step up their game. Now let me be crystal clear. I myself am excited for War Sales. I'm curious and particularly interested to see how the naval battles play out, as well as the introduction of a new Nordic faction, as well as a bunch of the new features the update and expansion brings with it. We saw a lot of cinematic footage in the trailers, which I have to hand it to TaleWorlds, they do know their audience. It was a really good teaser trailer that they shared with us over at Gamescom, obviously marketing the DLC and by extension the main game to the players out there who don't yet know about its existence. That's the whole point, of course, of marketing a game at such an event. But I guess the more important question is, do they listen to their community? The addition of a new stealth mechanic, which quite a few players thought was not a priority compared to other still missing features, suggests otherwise. Then you have the major downsides that this new DLC brings with it. As it is a separate instance from the main game, players will have to start a new campaign. For most, this will not be a problem, but if you've been playing modded Bannerlord for a while now, I'm afraid you'll have to wait and play the game without mods, as the community will have to adjust and update their mods to fit this new DLC, if they even choose to do so. So there is the possibility some of the mods you use will not even be playable, at least for the near future. Then there are the Q&As that the developers released to generate hype in regards to this new expansion, yet some of them had all these non-answers or hard no's to questions, such as, will fire arrows be in the base game? And then they have it written underneath, not yet determined, whilst we have mods that have those already implemented in the base game. It just, I don't know, it felt blunt, and it is kind of demoralizing as a player to see developers list off a bunch of features that won't be present in the game. And I haven't even gone into it in depth in this video. I know, it's also not my intent to go in depth, but rather to trigger some form of discussion, I guess, or at least hear out if other people share the same opinion as me, in that Bannerlord's native game lacks content and depth. It's repetitive, it gets dull playing without mods. It also still has many features that are not fleshed out and or missing. And I'm just worried that even with the DLC in the 1.3 update, the game will still have those issues present, whilst the developers will be prioritizing other aspects. You could also argue that this DLC, or most of the features that the 1.3 patch brings with it, should have been included in the base game upon release, all things considering. I guess we'll have to wait and see how this one goes. In any case, for the first weeks, possibly months, players playing the War Sales DLC, as I said, will be forced to play it without mods, and I'm very interested to see how that will play out. Let me know what you guys think about this in the comment section down below. Do you reckon it will be a letdown, or will we see some sort of resurgence? Will the community rally behind the developers and this new upcoming DLC and the 1.3 base game updates? And what of those in the modding community? I imagine the crouching feature could come in handy for some mods, especially the ones that tackle the Napoleonic Wars. As I said in the beginning, this video is to encourage civil discussion, so please be kind to each other in the comment section down below. I would love to hear your thoughts on Bannerlord, the state of this game, the upcoming War Sales DLC, the modding projects you're looking forward to, and so on. And I want to thank you for making it this far in this video, and I hope I'll get to see you in the next one. Take care, everyone.